Chapter 1. After being released from prison after 5 years, the first thing Lawrence Reed did was to schedule a sky burial. Mr. Reed, this is the sky burial service you have booked. After your death, your body will be transported to the mountains for the ceremony. You must first pay a deposit, with the remaining amount to be settled within 2 weeks. Lawrence nodded, pulled out a plastic bag from his faded jeans, counted the bills and coins he had saved up in prison, and finally paid the deposit with difficulty. He was diagnosed with cancer while in prison, and it is now in its late stages, with an estimated 1 month left to live. He recalled that years ago, he and Aaliyah Bailey had made a promise to hold their wedding in Sunset City, with all the deities of the mountains witnessing their unwavering love. Now that the wedding promise could no longer be fulfilled, letting him rest eternally in that sacred land would at least be a form of comfort. The cost of the sky burial was not low. After leaving the institution, he went to a nightclub to apply for a job as a server to pay off the remaining balance. With a criminal record, he couldn't find a legitimate job, and that place was a high-rolling club of vice in Peaker City, where the wages for waiters weren't bad either. After giving Lawrence some instructions, the person in charge handed him a uniform and told him to start working that night. After a brief training session, he carried the wine into the adjacent VIP lounge. The room was dimly lit, with many wealthy young men and women playing games. Lawrence crouched by the coffee table, carefully placing the bottle down, and was about to turn and leave when that familiar, cool voice suddenly drifted over from nearby. Ice's body stiffened, and he froze in place. Sure enough, on the sofa at the high end of the room, Aaliyah sat surrounded by admirers. Her cold, elegant features glowed under the shifting lights, exuding an air of aristocratic arrogance. 5 years had passed, yet her appearance hadn't changed at all. The only difference was a hint of icy detachment that kept others at bay. Lawrence couldn't help but glance at her twice, only then noticing that she was nestled in a man's arms, and that man was his best friend, Jason Cox. The two seemed to be discussing marriage. The wedding will be held at the seaside chapel as you like, with pink roses spread along the beach. If you don't like the dress the designer created last time, I'll arrange for someone to remake it. Everything will be based on your preferences. Listening to that familiar voice, Lawrence's thoughts drifted uncontrollably. 5 years ago, he had been so close to becoming Aaliyah's groom. They were childhood sweethearts and grew up together from a young age. When Lawrence's parents died unexpectedly, it was Aaliyah who stayed by his side through those difficult times. She rode her bicycle to school with him, stood up for him when he was bullied, and cared for him when he was sick. They naturally fell in love and took steps toward marriage, until the night before the wedding, when he accidentally killed Aaliyah's mother in a car accident. He would never forget that night, when Aaliyah's eyes were red with blood. She cornered him like a madwoman, demanding to know why, if there was some reason. Lawrence had never felt so desperate. He looked up and smiled. There was no reason. She saw me with another woman and threatened to tell you. In a fit of rage, I had no choice but to run her over. He would never forget the look in Aaliyah's eyes at that moment. Anger, hatred, and disappointment intertwined like an impenetrable net, completely ensnaring him, nearly suffocating him. In the end, Aaliyah personally sent him to prison. During his 5 years in prison, he often wondered if things would have turned out differently if he had revealed the truth. But reason reminded him he couldn't do that. Because Aaliyah's mother had been suffering from severe depression, and on the eve of their wedding, her condition flared up, ousting her to mistake the bodyguard for Aaliyah's father and have sex with him. At that moment, he had come to discuss wedding plans with Aaliyah, only to accidentally witness the scene. Aaliyah's mother came to her senses, regretted her actions, and begged him not to reveal the incident. Though conflicted, he ultimately agreed to her plea. But unexpectedly, after he left and started the car, Aaliyah's mother felt unable to bear it, threw herself at his vehicle. Aaliyah had always been a pampered princess. If this scandal were to surface, it would deal a devastating blow to her and the Bailey family. People in their circle wouldn't view her in a reasonable way, and might even question her identity. So, for Aaliyah's sake, he had to bear the consequences alone and take full responsibility. Now that he was terminally ill, there was no need to reveal the truth. If she hated him, let her hate him. That way, when he left, he could do without hesitation, without any regrets. As he trembled and was about to leave, someone suddenly called out his name from behind. Lawrence. You're out of prison. He shuddered, dared not look at the sharp gaze coming from the person who spoke, and was about to leave when someone tripped him as he stepped out the door. He wasn't prepared and collided with the coffee table, crashing heavily to the ground. Several bottles of alcohol on the coffee table shattered as he fell, and his hands were cut open in several places, bleeding profusely. The private room erupted into laughter, and everyone stood up to scrutinize his disheveled appearance. Lawrence, tease really you. You came to work right after getting out of prison. You're really working hard. He kept his head down and said nothing, only reaching out to press his hand against his bleeding wound. The person continued to speak. What are you standing there for? You spilled wine all over the floor. Hurry up and clean it up. Remember, you have to kneel down to clean it. A burst of laughter echoed in his ears. He could only pull out a cloth from his apron, kneel on the ground, and wipe the wine stains over and over again. He didn't look up, but he could feel Aaliyah's hate-filled gaze coldly fixed on him. Like a sharp knife hanging over his head, ready to deliver a fatal blow at any moment. She hated him so much. Seeing him suffer must bring her more joy than anyone else. Hurriedly finishing the cleanup, he tried to stand up and leave, but the person in front of him wasn't willing to let him off so easily. Think you can just leave? Wine you spilled is worth a fortune. What will you use to compensate for it? Lawrence clenched his fists in panic, dared not lift his head, and stammered, I'm sorry, I really didn't mean to. Do you think a simple I'm sorry will suffice? You can't afford to compensate me anyway. Here's what we'll do. Don't say that I didn't give you a chance. If you crawl under my legs, this matter will be settled. The man finished speaking, then coldly laughed as he placed one leg on the chair, his mocking gaze fixed on him. The crowd burst into laughter, then joined in unison. Crawl through. Crawl through. He clenched his teeth, feeling his cheeks burn. The mocking glances of the crowd felt like knives piercing his back. He couldn't escape. He had no money to compensate him, and the man in front of him was clearly venting his anger on behalf of Aaliyah. Even if he didn't kneel, the man would find other ways to take revenge on him. During his 5 years in prison, dignity had long since lost all meaning to him. His vision blurred, and he almost bit his lip until it bled. Finally, in front of everyone, he knelt down with a thud in front of the man. Just as he bent down to crawl between the man's legs, the coffee table was kicked over violently, and a cold, piercing voice rang out. Enough. Suddenly, his arm throbbed with pain, and before he could react, he was dragged out. In the dim corridor, Aaliyah pressed him harshly against the wall, her eyes filled with hatred and coldness. Lawrence, are you really going to degrade yourself like this? His back touched the cold marble, and his whole body shuddered involuntarily. He turned his head away. You shouldn't have stood up for me. How can your mother rest in peace if you do this? His words enraged her. She pushed him away forcefully. Stand up for me. You're overthinking it. I pulled you out here to make a deal with you. You're short on money, aren't you? Tonight, you'll stand guard outside my room all night, and I'll pay you. From now on, you'll stay by my side, and I guarantee the money I'll give you will be more than what you earn as a hostess. Without waiting for his refusal, she pulled out a stack of money and slammed it into his face. Lawrence was hit so hard his face turned sideways, and blood immediately seeped from his cheek. He knew she was making such a demand solely to take revenge on him. And she did indeed succeed. That night, as he stood outside the door, he heard the intimate sounds of her and Jason. Chapter 2. The sound lingered on, but he was like a walking dead, unaware even as tears streamed down his face. It wasn't until dawn that Aaliyah opened the door and coldly looked at him. Clean up the room. He looked at the battlefield, littered with condoms on the floor, his heart trembling violently, but he said nothing, only nodding silently. Jason emerged from the bathroom with scratches all over his back, paused at the sight, then took her hand and pleaded, "Aaliyah, it's all over now. Just let go of Lawrence." Aaliyah curled her lips into a smile, but her eyes remained cold. "He wanted money, so I gave him money to do my bidding. It's a fair deal. What is let go means." After speaking, she wrapped her arms around him and softened her tone. "Rest assured, before the wedding, I'll make sure he disappears completely." In the days that followed, wherever Aaliyah and Jason went, she brought Lawrence along. When someone offered a toast, she had him take the drink, until he was so drunk he stumbled to the restroom, vomiting repeatedly, yet she never said stop. During meals, she made him serve Jason like a servant, peeling shrimp shells, removing fish bones, wiping his hands, and even accompanying him to the restroom. Meanwhile, she pampered Jason excessively in front of everyone. After each social gathering, she would take a stack of cash from the car with a blank expression and throw it forcefully onto him. Today's payment. In the face of her humiliation, he never reacted, only silently bent down to pick up the soiled bills and carefully put them away in his bag. Yes, he needed the money. Once he had enough, he could disappear from her world completely. Sky burial. Not even a bone or a piece of flesh would remain. In this world, it would be as though Lawrence had never existed. On Jason's birthday, Aaliyah threw him a grand birthday banquet. Her devotion to Jason was evident to everyone. The banquet was decorated entirely according to Jason's preferences. It was said that the venue alone used a full 1,000,000 roses. The clothes Jason wore that day were still designed by Aaliyah's mother herself for her future son-in-law. The two walked hand in hand onto the stage, immediately becoming the center of everyone's attention. Aaliyah was as stunningly beautiful and graceful as ever, but the man standing beside her was no longer Lawrence. Unconsciously, he recalled the scene of their engagement. At that time, it was equally grand and magnificent, with their family and friends witnessing her deep affection for him, as they walked hand in hand toward the door of happiness. She took out the family heirloom ring and placed it on his finger, saying that once he wore her ring, he would be hers forever, and they would never part. The whispers around him interrupted his memories. What was Lawrence thinking? He and Aaliyah were childhood sweethearts. Aaliyah practically spoiled him rotten, treating him like a precious treasure. Yet he went and killed her mother. Exactly. Everyone in the city knew how much Aaliyah loved him. I can't understand why he's so stubborn. If it weren't for that incident, they'd probably have a child in elementary school by now. Don't even think about it. How could you possibly understand the mind of such a heartless man? He deserves to end up like this. Exactly. A man like him deserves to die. Lawrence listened to the curses around him, his face expressionless. As they wished, he would soon be dead. The banquet ended, and Aaliyah was still bidding farewell to the guests. Lawrence and Jason waited by the lake at the entrance for her to come out. This was their first time alone together since he was released from prison. Jason remained silent for a long time before speaking. "Lawrence, do you know? I've always deeply loved Aaliyah. I fell for her before you were with her. Back then, the two of you were in love, and I had already given up on her, ready to bless your relationship. But why did you betray Aaliyah? Do you know how much pain Aaliyah has endured over the years? I finally managed to comfort her, so why did you have to show up now and disrupt her emotions?" Lawrence looked at the man before him, never having imagined that his best friend, who had been by his side all these years, had secretly loved his beloved all along. But now that he had reappeared, he had never intended to disrupt their lives. A man who had killed her mother, a man on the brink of death, there was nothing he could do to compete. Jason, I'll be leaving soon. Jason stared at him coldly, his eyes flickering with disbelief. Suddenly, he ripped the ring off his finger and threw it into the lake with force. Lawrence, you threw my ring into the water. You should help me retrieve it, right? Chapter 3. As the words fell, Aaliyah's figure flickered into view. She angrily grabbed Lawrence's hand, her eyes blazing with anger. Lawrence, you never stop, do you? The ring I gave Jason, what does it have to do with you? Why did you suddenly throw it away? Lawrence stared into her eyes, and in her furious gaze, he seemed to catch a hint of expectation. Could it be that she expected him to throw away Jason's ring out of jealousy? A bitter taste filled his heart, but he forced a smile. Why would I throw away an insignificant ring? To me, it's not as important as the stack of cash you gave me. Aaliyah's eyes turned icy cold. She suddenly pushed him into the lake, and with a splash, his scream echoed, but she had already turned away and didn't look back at him. I don't care how you do it, but you must retrieve the ring for me. After saying that, she pulled Jason away without hesitation. It was winter, and a recent snowfall had made the weather exceptionally cold. Ice floes drifted sporadically across the lake surface, their mere sight sending shivers down one's spine. Lawrence was submerged in the icy lake water, which was so cold it nearly froze him solid. The mud at the lake bottom was littered with sharp fragments that pierced his feet, causing blood to flow freely. He bit his lip, diving underwater again and again, then surfacing again and again. He continued this mechanical search in the lake for the entire night, until the blood had stained a large portion of the lake surface red. Finally, he found the ring at the bottom of the lake. When he appeared before Aaliyah, battered and disheveled, she furrowed her brows, pulled a stack of bills from her pocket, and coldly tossed them at his feet. As he had done every time before, he took the money and left in silence. For the next few days, Aaliyah unusually did not cause him any trouble. Until that day, when he returned home and saw the entire Bailey family villa shrouded in thick smoke as soon as he got out of the car. A sudden sense of unease welled up in his heart. Aaliyah was in danger. The thought flashed through his mind, and he rushed toward the fire without hesitation. Aaliyah always preferred quiet, so the maids only cleaned the house when she wasn't there. She had been staying home these past few days, so there was no one else in the Bailey family mansion besides her. Since he was very familiar with the Bailey family mansion, he quickly found the unconscious Aaliyah in the bedroom. The fire had spread extremely quickly. She must have been taking sleeping pills and resting, which is why she was caught off guard by the fire and overcome by smoke, leaving her unconscious. He struggled to lift her onto his shoulders and moved toward the door with great difficulty. The fire grew larger, nearly completely blocking the path. As he thought, a burning beam suddenly fell from the ceiling. Without hesitation, he shielded Aaliyah with his body. His back was struck by the scorching wooden beam, and the pain nearly caused him to faint. Looking at Aaliyah, who was lying on his shoulder, frowning and in a deep sleep, he felt a determination he had never experienced before. He had to save Aaliyah, even if it cost him his life. With that determination, he risked his life and managed to rescue her from the fire. The two of them collapsed on the lawn. He struggled to breathe in the fresh air, his entire body covered in injuries. When he saw Jason running toward them, he mustered his last ounce of strength and pushed Aaliyah into the other person's arms. If she wakes up, tell her you saved her. Jason looked at the man before him, unsure of what he was up to. He called out to Lawrence as he stood up to leave and asked again. Tell me, Mrs. Bailey, did you intentionally kill her? He staggered to his feet, his body stiffening at the accusation. After a long pause, he spoke. Yes. With that, he hurried away without looking back. In the days that followed, Jason took meticulous care of Aaliyah. After learning that Jason had risked his life to save her, she treated him so well it was almost jealousy-inducing, granting him every request. Their intimate moments also became more frequent. Lawrence, who was waiting outside the room, clearly heard their passionate exchanges and the sweet words she whispered to him. He thought, perhaps now, Aaliyah had truly fallen for Jason. That was fine. She had long since deserved to find her true happiness. As for him, he was like a rat in the sewers, lurking in the shadows to watch others' happiness. The wound on his back still throbbed with pain, and he could only apply medicine to it secretly when no one was around. That day, as usual, he hid in his small room, took off his coat, and was about to apply medicine when the door suddenly opened. It was Aaliyah. Her gaze fell on the gruesome wound on his back, and her eyes immediately turned red. Then, she walked toward him step by step, her voice trembling. What happened to these burns? Were you the one who saved me that day? Chapter 4. Lawrence didn't know how she had suddenly appeared here. He jumped up reflexively and quickly put his clothes back on. Looking into Aaliyah's sad eyes, he almost blurted out the truth. But his reason quickly returned. He forced himself to put on a carefree smile. What are you talking about? What do you mean, saving you? This injury. It happened when I was in prison, fighting with other men over a woman, then I got burned. The men in prison are all brutal. Those women were all vying to sleep with me, and they couldn't stand it, so they had to resort to such methods to deal with me. Aaliyah was so enraged by his words that her face turned pale, and the compassion in her eyes vanished. She angrily grabbed his neck, as if she wanted to strangle him to death. Lawrence, you have no heart. Are you that desperate for excitement? Haven't I satisfied you? What was our relationship back then? He was choked until his face turned red, coughing violently. But when she let go, he burst into laughter. What was it? It was your deep affection, your foolishness. Aaliyah, I truly wanted to marry you, but loving only one person for a lifetime is too difficult. In truth, those other women were just flings. If it weren't for your mother catching me in the act and forcing me to kill her, we wouldn't have ended up like this. After all, no matter how they are, they can't compare to how good you've been to me, can they? Aaliyah's face alternated between pale and flushed, clearly enraged to the extreme. She angrily shook off his hand, her tone devoid of any emotion. Lawrence, you make me feel sick. Loving you was the biggest regret of my life. With that, she didn't look at him once more, storming out and slamming the door behind her. The room was finally left with only him. He collapsed weakly against the bed, slowly sitting down. Wasn't this what he wanted? For her to completely despise him and never think of him again. But why did his heart ache so much, as if someone had taken a knife and sliced it open, then sprinkled salt on the wound? It will pass, he comforted himself. After getting dressed, Jason offered to drive him out to run some errands. The Bailey family clearly had a driver, and Lawrence didn't know why he insisted on driving himself, but he didn't ask any further questions. As he sat in the driver's seat and started the car, Jason, who had been standing beside him moments ago, suddenly rushed to the front of the car and collapsed on the ground, covered in blood. Lawrence was completely stunned. The car had only just started and hadn't even moved yet. Even if it had hit him, it wouldn't have been that severe. Where did the blood on his body come from? Before he could figure it out, Aaliyah had already rushed over. She hurriedly helped Jason up, her voice filled with urgency. Jason, how are you? Jason leaned weakly against her, his pitiful gaze fixed on Lawrence. Aaliyah, don't blame Lawrence. Nay didn't do it on purpose. As he spoke, he suddenly coughed up a mouthful of blood. The vivid red color stung Aaliyah's eyes. She looked up at Lawrence coldly, and the image of her mother being hit by a car flashed through her mind. In that moment, she lost control completely. Lawrence, you're incorrigible. Jason caught you with someone else again, so you did this to him. She clenched her teeth, carried Jason to the car, and then sat down in the driver's seat. As the engine roared to life, Aaliyah's eyes grew increasingly red. She stared at the person in front of her, the images of her mother's death and Jason coughing up blood overlapping like a net, completely ensnaring her. Her heart suddenly felt as though it were being squeezed by an invisible hand, the pain making it hard for her to breathe. But those images and Jason's moans appeared again, and she finally calmed herself, stomping on the gas pedal and plowing straight toward Lawrence. Chapter 5. Bang. With a screeching brake sound, Lawrence was sent flying into the air. For those few seconds suspended in midair, his world was a blur. As his body hit the ground, he seemed to hear the sound of his bones shattering. Moments later, he lost consciousness entirely. It felt like a dream, where he had returned to the time when he and Aaliyah were still in love. At that time, he had just gotten his driver's license and was still unfamiliar with driving. Aaliyah sat beside him, teaching him step by step. Lawrence, don't be afraid. Drive boldly. I'm here with you. But the scene suddenly changed. The person beside him vanished, replaced by the image of her with reddened eyes, furiously pressing the accelerator toward him. Lawrence jolted awake from the dream, his forehead covered in sweat, his back soaked. When he woke up, he realized he was already in the hospital, his chest aching terribly. It wasn't until the nurse came to give him a shot that he found out several of his ribs were broken. During his time in the hospital, Aaliyah never came to visit him. He hadn't expected her to come in the first place, after all, she hated him so much now. When he was discharged from the hospital, Aaliyah was already busy preparing for her wedding with Jason. She demanded that he participate in the entire process. Because she wanted him to watch her marry another man. To watch everything that once belonged to him be given to someone else. Lawrence didn't refuse. He obediently followed her and Jason, watching her pick out a wedding dress for Jason, take wedding photos with him, and finalize the wedding venue. He had walked this path once before, but now the protagonist had changed. On the anniversary of Aaliyah's mother's death, he bought flowers early in the morning and went to pay his respects. He sat beside the tombstone, resting his head against it, gazing at the kind and gentle face in the photo, and spoke to himself. Auntie, are you doing well over there? Are you lonely? Do you remember how much you loved me when you were alive? You said I was like your own son. In my heart, you were like my own mother. Don't worry, I'll be there to accompany you soon. In fact, before Mrs. Bailey passed away, their relationship was very close. Lawrence, who had lost his mother at a young age, found the maternal love he had been missing in her. Originally, they were about to become a real family. But fate was cruel, and they ultimately jacked the necessary karmic connection. Familiar voice. He looked up and realized it was Aaliyah and Mr. Bailey coming to pay their respects together. Upon seeing him, Mr. Bailey's expression changed instantly. You bastard. Who let you come here? How dare you show up? Without another word, he rushed forward and tried to push him away with all his strength. Lawrence had just been in a car accident, and with such a forceful push, he had no strength to get up. He fell heavily onto the tombstone, his head hitting it hard and leaving a gash. Blood trickled down his cheek. He covered the wound but said nothing. Mr. Bailey's anger did not diminish in the slightest despite his injury. He unleashed a torrent of curses. You don't deserve to be here. Murderer. You're the one who deserves to die. What did the Bailey family ever do to you? Aaliyah loved you so much, and my wife treated you like her own son. Why did you have to kill her? By the end, his voice choked with emotion, almost unable to speak. His face was deathly pale, yet he remained crouched on the ground, silent and unresponsive. Chapter 6. Aaliyah stood beside him, coldly watching him. She knew he had just broken a few ribs from her collision, but she couldn't help but come to his defense. Don't dirty my mother's tombstone here. Go wait in the car. Lawrence struggled to his feet and staggered toward the exit. Only now did Mr. Bailey realize that Aaliyah had been keeping Lawrence by her side all these days. His face turned ashen, his brows furrowed, and a hint of sadness crept into his expression. Aaliyah, tell me the truth, do you still love this man? Aaliyah averted her eyes, unable to meet his gaze, her body trembling slightly. No, I no longer love him. The only emotion I feel for him now is hatred. Mr. Bailey, usually towering, now seemed somehow frail. He stared at Aaliyah with his snow-white hair, his eyes betraying his age. You're my daughter, how could you buy this from me? Aaliyah, Lawrence is the man who killed your mother. Even if you like him, it's impossible between you two. How could you fall in love with your mother's murderer? How could your mother rest in peace if she saw this? His words left Aaliyah frozen in place, barely able to move. These days, she had numbed herself. She only felt hatred toward Lawrence, and keeping him by her side was merely for revenge. But she knew that was just a way to deceive herself. She remained silent for a long time before finally speaking. Dad, rest assured. I'll marry Jason as soon as possible. As for Lawrence, I'll make him leave and never appear before you or me again. In the final days before the wedding, Aaliyah didn't think of any more schemes to torment him. Instead, she drove him out alone. The two of them went to the place where they had once dated, the Love Bridge. Back then, when they came here together, she had twisted her ankle halfway there, and he had carried her to the bridge, where they had hung a love lock symbolizing their eternal love. But this time, the once closest lover had changed beyond recognition. Aaliyah searched for a long time before finding the location of their love lock. She took out a pair of scissors, silently cut the lock, and then threw it into the lake without hesitation. Then, she took him to Wishing Park outside the city and untied the wishing card they had tied together. The wishes they had written on the card were still vividly etched in her memory. Aaliyah and Lawrence will be together forever. But in an instant, the wishing card blown away by the wind and disappeared over the cliff. Next, they went to the beach where they had fallen in love, and to the forest where they had once planted a wish tree together. Lawrence knew that she was gradually erasing all traces of their love. Like him, she had decided to completely remove him from her life. After visiting all the places they needed to go, Aaliyah leaned against the car door and smoked several cigarettes, smoking fiercely. After the cigarette butts on the ground had burned out, she pulled out a check from her pocket and handed it to Lawrence. The money in here is enough to compensate for the broken Remy Martins at the club. The remainder, use it to buy a plane ticket and never show your face in front of me again. Don't tell me where you're going, and don't let me find you. His palm was marked with blood from her nails, and his heart felt like it was being torn apart, making it hard to breathe. After a long time, he finally took the check and quietly agreed. All right. Both of them looked up, their eyes meeting unexpectedly, and they spoke almost simultaneously. Lawrence, we'll never see each other again. Aaliyah, we'll never see each other again. Aaliyah lowered her eyes, never looking at him again, and turned away resolutely. Lawrence watched her back silently as it faded into the distance, then walked in the opposite direction. Chapter 7. 3 days before the wedding, Lawrence paid all the fees for the Sky burial. On the same day, the news of Aaliyah and Jason's upcoming wedding made headlines in all the news outlets. Aaliyah and Jason's wedding would be held by the sea, and all the wealthy people in the city would attend. The celebrities in their circle also posted on Instagram to congratulate them, with more than a dozen trending topics. 2 days before the wedding, Lawrence booked a flight to Sunset City. On that day, Aaliyah spent millions to set off a grand fireworks display across the city to celebrate in advance. Under the dazzling fireworks, everyone congratulated her and Jason on their happy marriage and wished them a lifetime of love. On the day before the wedding, Lawrence packed a box and set it ablaze, burning everything inside to ashes. Inside were the gifts Aaliyah had once given him, all the memories he shared with her, and the treasures he cherished most while in prison. But now, with his life nearing its end, these items held no meaning left. The Aaliyah he deeply loved would walk down the aisle with the man she loved, hand in hand. He thought she would be happy, they would have several children, and they would live happily ever after. Just like they had promised each other back when they were still together. The flames danced before his eyes, reducing all their memories of love to fragments, which vanished bit by bit with the flames. That evening, at the restaurant, Jason noticed Aaliyah's distracted expression and felt a strange unease. "Aaliyah, are you still thinking about Lawrence?" Aaliyah snapped back to reality, took his hand, and spoke softly, "Number. Jason, I've completely let go of him. Trust me, I'll love you well from now on. From this day forward, you are the most important person in my life." Jason finally smiled and nodded contentedly. After finishing their meal, the two planned to return home to prepare for tomorrow's wedding. But just as they were about to leave, the chandelier above suddenly fell, striking Jason on the head. Blood gushed out instantly, and he collapsed unconscious on the spot. Aaliyah's face turned pale as she rushed him to the hospital, where he was admitted to the emergency room. The doctor said he was bleeding heavily and needed a blood transfusion immediately, but the blood bank was running low on Rh-negative blood. Someone had to donate enough blood to save his life. Aaliyah was frantic with worry and immediately ordered her assistant to search the entire city for someone with the same blood type as Jason to donate blood. The assistant conducted an urgent search and finally found the name of the person in the blood bank. Lawrence. He rushed to Aaliyah and reported, "Miss Bailey, there is only one person whose blood type matches Mr. Cox's, but he is." Before he could finish, Aaliyah interrupted him. "I don't care who it is, we must save Jason, even if it means draining that person's blood. No matter the cost, do you understand?" The assistant said no more and hurriedly arranged for someone to bring Lawrence to the hospital. At that moment, Lawrence was holding his ticket, preparing to go to the airport, when he was suddenly taken to the hospital and forced into the blood donation room. He had no idea what was happening and struggled violently. The nurses couldn't proceed, so they had to go fetch Aaliyah's assistant. Upon seeing Lawrence, the assistant's face betrayed nothing but disgust. He had been by Aaliyah's side for many years and knew everything that had happened over the years, so he had no goodwill toward Lawrence. "Mr. Reed, bringing you here was Miss Bailey's idea. Mr. Cox suffered a severe hemorrhage, and only your blood type matches his. Miss Bailey said that as long as it can save Mr. Cox, she wouldn't hesitate to drain every drop of your blood. This place is filled with our people. I advise you not to struggle. Besides, you already owe Miss Bailey your life, don't you?" As the words fell, Lawrence froze, and his struggles grew weaker. Yes, he already owed Aaliyah his life. And whether he donated blood or not, he was going to die sooner or later. It was just a matter of dying sooner or later. Thinking this, he gave up struggling completely. The needle pierced his vein forcefully, and he watched as his blood flowed out drop by drop, his face growing paler and paler. 400 milliliters. 600 milliliters. 800 milliliters. 1000 milliliters. As more and more blood was drawn, the alarm from the machine sounded, and his vision grew blurry. He closed his eyes helplessly, feeling his life slip away with the blood. "Aaliyah, this time, it's really goodbye." The alarm grew louder and louder until it finally became a straight line. The nurse screamed in horror, quickly pulled out the needle, and ran down the hallway. "The blood is gone. He's no longer breathing." Chapter 8. The assistant stood at the door of the blood donation room and heard the nurses scream. He was struck as if by lightning and rushed inside. His gaze fell on Lawrence's pale face, which had once been handsome but was now completely bloodless, like a cold sculpture. A needle was still inserted into Lawrence's wrist, but the blood had stopped flowing. On the instrument's screen, the straight line was jarringly stark. Lawrence is dead, the assistant murmured, as if unable to believe what he was seeing. Though he was not a supporter of Lawrence and even harbored deep distaste for him, a complex mix of emotions welled up within him at that moment. He knew Lawrence had betrayed Aaliyah, that he was considered a man of questionable character, but over the years, the assistant had witnessed Miss Bailey's feelings for him. That torment of love and hate, that unbearable pain, he understood it better than anyone. Now that Lawrence was dead, what would Miss Bailey's reaction be? The assistant's mind was in chaos. He instinctively shouted at the nurse, "Quick! Quick! Save him! Do whatever it takes to bring him back." The nurse shook her head, her voice heavy. "He's already stopped breathing. He had cancer to begin with, and after losing so much blood, there's no chance to save him anymore." Cancer. The assistant froze. He had never heard that Lawrence had cancer. How could he have cancer? He had just been released from prison not long ago. How could he? At that moment, hurried footsteps echoed from the end of the corridor. Aaliyah strode over, her brows furrowed, her voice tinged with fatigue. "Jason has been released from the resuscitation room, thanks to the blood donated by that person. Arrange for additional compensation." The assistant's heart sank. He glanced at Lawrence lying on the bed, then at Aaliyah, unsure of how to speak. Aaliyah's gaze swept over the blood donation room, seemingly unaware of the person on the bed. She coldly urged, "What? Is there a problem?" The assistant clenched his teeth but ultimately did not reveal the truth. He hurried to the bedside, covered Lawrence's face with a white sheet, then turned to Aaliyah and said, "Miss Bailey, the blood donor, has died." Aaliyah's footsteps halted, her brows furrowing slightly in surprise, but she quickly regained her composure. She spoke indifferently. "Died? Then comfort his family properly and give them more money." The assistant nodded, but his heart was filled with mixed emotions. Aaliyah's reaction was so cold because she believed the deceased was just an insignificant stranger. But it was Lawrence. The man she had once deeply loved, the man she had hated for so many years. "Miss Bailey." The assistant opened his mouth, as if he wanted to say something else, but Aaliyah had already turned and left, leaving only a cold statement, "Jason is waiting for me. Come over once you've finished here." The assistant stood there, eventually choosing to silently watch Aaliyah's figure fade into the distance at the end of the corridor. He glanced down at Lawrence, covered in white cloth, a complex mix of emotions welling up inside him. He knew that Lawrence's death meant there would be no further obstacles to Miss Bailey and Mr. Cox's wedding. But he also understood that Aaliyah's feelings for Lawrence were far more complex than she let on. "Lawrence." The assistant murmured softly, a sense of inexplicable sadness welling up in his heart. "Don't blame me. Miss Bailey is about to marry Mr. Cox. Her life is about to enter a new chapter. Whether you live or not, you must completely step out of her life." The assistant took a deep breath and turned to leave the blood donation room. He knew he had to handle Lawrence's affairs quickly and not let Miss Bailey know about his death. He called the funeral home and arranged for them to cremate Lawrence's body. However, just as he was about to hang up, a nurse walked over, looking hesitant. "Sir, there's something I must tell you," the nurse whispered. "Before he passed away, Mr. Lawrence gave me a phone number and said he had booked a sky burial 2 weeks ago. He asked us to help him fulfill it." The assistant froze, shocked. Sky burial. Why would Lawrence book a sky burial? Did he already know he was going to die 2 weeks ago? Chapter 9. The assistant immediately called the sky burial reservation number and confirmed that Lawrence had indeed made the reservation half a month ago. The assistant felt uneasy. He realized that Lawrence had too many secrets and might not be as despicable as he appeared on the surface. He gathered his thoughts and went to meet the person in charge of arranging the sky burial. Upon learning that the sky burial process was extremely complicated and required traveling to Sunset City, he pondered for a long time. After all, it was Lawrence's final wish, and without him present, he feared the news of Lawrence's death might be leaked. So after much deliberation, he hurried to the hospital to request leave from Aaliyah. When he entered the hospital ward, Jason had already woken up and was lying in bed, chatting with Aaliyah. Aaliyah, once I'm discharged, shall we go to that new Japanese restaurant? Jason's voice carried a hint of anticipation. Aaliyah smiled gently and gently stroked his cheek. Sure, I'll accompany you wherever you wish to dine. The assistant stood at the door, watching the affectionate scene between the two, and a complex emotion welled up in his heart. He thought of Lawrence, who was now silent, and felt a pang of sadness. Miss Bailey, I need to take some time off. The assistant stepped forward and spoke softly. Aaliyah looked up, her brows slightly furrowed. Take time off. With the wedding approaching and there is so much to do, how can you take time off now? The assistant lowered his head and made up an excuse. There's an urgent matter at home that I need to handle. Aaliyah's expression darkened. She clearly didn't want to grant the leave at this time. However, Jason suddenly spoke up. Aaliyah, the wedding can be postponed for a few days. Anyway, Lawrence is already gone, and your heart and body are already mine. The wedding is just a ceremony. I want it to be grand and without regrets. Aaliyah paused, seemingly moved by Jason's words. She remained silent for a moment before finally nodding. All right, go handle your matters. Come back as soon as you're done. The assistant sighed in relief and turned to leave the hospital. Before departing, he glanced back at Aaliyah and Jason, who were still clinging to each other, as if nothing in the world could separate them. The assistant felt a pang of bitterness, thinking that perhaps this was the best possible outcome. He carried Lawrence's body and set off on the journey to Sunset City. Along the way, Lawrence's figure kept flashing through his mind, the once confident and ambitious man, now reduced to a cold, lifeless body. The assistant stood on the sky burial platform, gazing at the distant snow-capped mountains, his mind filled with confusion. He didn't know whether he should tell Miss Bailey about all this. But Miss Bailey was already with Mr. Cox, and their wedding was imminent. Perhaps Lawrence's death should not disturb their lives any further. Lawrence, what were you hiding? Why did you book the sky burial half a month ago? Did you already know you were going to die? But no one could answer his questions. Lawrence had left this world, taking all his secrets with him, gone forever. Chapter 10. After the sky burial was completed, everyone left. The assistant thought of Lawrence from back then, and then realized that he was the murderer of the old lady. He felt that there were some things that weren't clear. The assistant hesitated for a long time, struggling with whether or not to investigate the matter from back then. But just as he was about to dial the phone, it suddenly rang. I was Aaliyah. Your leave is almost over. Have you returned yet? Aaliyah's voice remained cold, tinged with an air of unquestionable authority. The assistant paused for a moment before responding, Miss Bailey, I'll be back immediately. Aaliyah hummed in acknowledgement and continued, I've decided to postpone the wedding for a while. The invitations and venue will need to be rescheduled. This time, it must be even more grand. The assistant was startled. The wedding was postponed. He blurted out, Miss Bailey, aren't we going to hold the wedding immediately? Do we need to postpone it for a long time? Aaliyah fell silent for a moment, her tone tinged with impatience. Jason's health hasn't fully recovered yet. Postponing the wedding for a while will be better for him. Come back as soon as possible and arrange the new wedding details. The assistant nodded, but deep down, he felt something was off. Although Aaliyah's tone was cold, he detected an unusual emotion in it. Could it be that Aaliyah still cared about Lawrence? After hanging up the phone, the assistant looked up at the sky one last time and sighed silently. He knew he had no reason to continue investigating. Lawrence was dead, and his secrets had been buried forever in the depths of the sea along with him. He turned and left, heading back on his way. Upon returning to the city where Aaliyah was staying, the assistant rushed straight to her villa. Aaliyah and Jason were sitting in the living room, discussing the details of the wedding. Faison wore a sweet smile on his face, while Aaliyah occasionally nodded in response to his suggestions. "You're back," Jason said with a smile when he saw the assistant. "Aaliyah and I are discussing the wedding. Do you have any suggestions?" The assistant shook his head respectfully. "Mr. Cox, you and Miss Bailey can decide on the wedding details. I will fully cooperate." Jason nodded satisfactorily and then began to enthusiastically list his requirements. The wedding venue needs to be chosen again. It should be by the sea. I love the romantic atmosphere of the beach. The wedding dress also needs to be redesigned. I wasn't very satisfied with the last one. Additionally, the guest list for the wedding needs to be revised. I want to invite some friends from abroad. The assistant recorded his requests one by one, but his mind was elsewhere. His gaze occasionally drifted toward Aaliyah, noticing that although she was sitting beside Jason, her eyes were wandering, as if she wasn't fully engaged in the wedding discussion. "Aaliyah, do you have any requests?" Jason suddenly turned his head and asked Aaliyah with a smile. Aaliyah snapped back to reality and said softly, "December 10th is a great date. Let's hold the wedding on that day." Jason and the assistant both froze. The date Aaliyah mentioned was 3 months later. 3 months from now. Jason frowned slightly in displeasure. Why wait so long? We could choose a closer date. Aaliyah glanced at him, her tone calm yet unwavering. "That day is a great date. Holding the wedding then would be better for us. Plus, your body needs time to recover. There's no rush." Jason's expression darkened, but he forced a smile and didn't insist further. He turned to his assistant and asked, "What do you think?" The assistant felt a pang of anxiety. He knew Aaliyah's decision was final, but he could also see Jason's dissatisfaction. He replied cautiously, "Miss Bailey must have her reasons. I'll arrange everything according to her instructions." Jason said nothing more, but his expression grew somber. He shifted the topic. "What about the honeymoon? Where should we go? I'd like to go to the Maldives, or Paris would be nice too." Aaliyah shook her head, her tone cold. "Those places are too ordinary. They're not worth it." Jason muttered unhappily, "Then where do you want to go?" Aaliyah paused for a moment before saying slowly, "Sunset City." The assistant's heart skipped a beat, and the pen in his hand nearly fell to the ground. Sunset City. Why did Miss Bailey want to go to Sunset City? Lawrence too. Why choose Sunset City for the sky burial? Could it be that this was some kind of prior agreement between them? Jason clearly didn't notice the assistant's unusual reaction. He furrowed his brow and reluctantly said, "Sunset City. What's so great about that place? It's cold and desolate. I don't want to go." Aaliyah glanced at him, her tone unwavering. "Sunset City is a sacred place. I want to take you there to see it." Jason wanted to say more, but Aaliyah had already stood up and told the assistant, "Come with me. There are some matters to discuss." The assistant followed Aaliyah upstairs, feeling a growing sense of unease. Aaliyah discussed some work-related matters, but her tone was distracted. Soon the work-related matters were settled, but she didn't dismiss the assistant. The assistant stood in Aaliyah's study, the air feeling thick and still. Aaliyah stood with her back to him by the floor-to-ceiling window, the cigarette in her hand burning down to the filter, but she seemed oblivious. The assistant sensed her unspoken meaning and cautiously asked, "Miss Bailey, is there something else you need to discuss?" Aaliyah remained silent for a moment before finally asking, "How is he?" Her voice was hoarse, as if forced out from the depths of her throat. The assistant's heart sank. He knew Aaliyah was asking about Lawrence. Though Aaliyah hadn't mentioned his name, the assistant understood who he was. He lowered his head, his fingers trembling slightly, and forced his voice to sound calm. Miss Bailey, you told him to never show his face to you again. He should have already left Maple City and gone abroad. Aaliyah didn't speak, just stood there quietly, as if processing the answer. The assistant could feel an oppressive atmosphere in the air, like the calm before a storm, suffocating. After a long time, Aaliyah spoke slowly. What happened to the person who donated blood earlier? The assistant's heart skipped a beat, and the pale, bloodless face of Lawrence flashed through his mind. Chapter 11. He clenched his teeth, forcing himself to calm down, and continued lying. Miss Bailey, the blood donor has been properly handled. His family has been compensated, and the matter is end. Aaliyah did not turn around, merely uttering a soft hum as if unconcerned with the answer. Is there anything else? The assistant asked cautiously. Aaliyah remained silent for a moment before finally waving her hand. That's all. You may go now. The assistant sighed in relief and turned to leave the study. As he closed the door, he couldn't help but glance back at Aaliyah. The tall, slender figure still stood by the window, as if cut off from the rest of the world, lonely and cold. In the study, Aaliyah slowly raised her hand and pulled out an old ring box from the depths of the drawer. The velvet on the box had faded, and the edges were worn, but the ring inside still shone brightly. It was the engagement ring she had prepared for Lawrence years ago. She opened the box, and the diamond on the ring sparkled faintly in the sunlight. Aaliyah's fingertips gently traced the ring, and memories long since sealed away began to surface in her mind. At 15, when they were still in high school, it was their flirtatious phase. Lawrence always sat in the row in front of her, and during class, his short hair would gently sway with his movements. She would often stare at his back in a daze until he suddenly turned around and gave her a mischievous smile. Aaliyah, I don't understand this question. Can you teach me? He pushed the textbook toward her, his eyes sparkling with a hint of playfulness. She glanced at the question and realized it was a basic problem that couldn't be simpler. She raised an eyebrow, her tone tinged with teasing. You don't know such a simple question. Did you zone out again during class? Lawrence laughed nervously. You caught me. She shook her head helplessly and picked up her pen to start explaining it to him. Her fingers accidentally brushed against his wrist, and both of them froze for a moment. Lawrence's ears turned red instantly. He lowered his head, pretending to listen carefully, but she noticed that the tips of his ears were so red they seemed ready to bleed. But he didn't notice that her heart was racing, beating wildly. Because she realized she was doomed, she could only have him. At 20, she blushed under the moonlight and confessed her feelings to him, confirming their relationship. That was when they were still in college. Lawrence was wearing a white shirt, standing under a cherry blossom tree, smiling like a ray of sunshine. He tilted his head back, watching the cherry blossoms swirling through the air, his eyes filled with anticipation. Aaliyah, do you think we'll always be this happy? He turned to her and asked with a smile. She reached out and ruffled his hair, her voice sweet. Of course we will. We'll stay together forever, until we're old and hair gray. Lawrence smiled even more brightly, lowered his head, and gently kissed her cheek. Then you have to promise me that our wedding will be held in Sunset City. I heard from the elders that getting married in the holiest place under the mountains means two lovers will be together forever, life after life. She smiled and nodded. All right, I'll do whatever you say. At 22, they officially moved in together. They ate together, watched movies together, and planted flowers together. On countless nights, they embraced each other, expressing their love. One night, Lawrence sat on the sofa, flipping through a wedding magazine. Aaliyah, what do you think of this wedding dress? He pointed to a white wedding dress in the magazine, his eyes full of anticipation. She walked over, sat beside him, and leaned into his embrace. As long as you like it. Lawrence rested his head on her shoulder, his voice tinged with longing. Our wedding must be held in Sunset City, so that all the gods of mountain can witness our love. Then, we'll have 2 children, a boy and a girl. The boy will be like me, and the girl will be like you. How about that? She turned her head and kissed his forehead, her voice gentle. All right, everything will be as you wish. He smiled even more brightly, wrapped his arms around her waist, and whispered softly in her ear, Aaliyah, I love you. Her heart skipped a beat, and she held him tighter, whispering back, I love you too, Lawrence. Those memories flooded back like a tidal wave, and Aaliyah's fingertips trembled slightly. She remembered their first handhold, their first kiss, their first vow of eternal love. She remembered how dependent he had been on her, how much he had loved her. But why? Why had he betrayed her? Why had he killed her mother? Why had he destroyed everything they had? A flash of pain crossed Aaliyah's eyes as she abruptly closed the ring box and threw it forcefully into the trash can. The ring box traced an arc through the air before landing at the bottom of the trash can with a dull thud. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and tried to calm the turmoil within her. She knew she couldn't dwell on the past anymore. Lawrence was gone, perhaps as the assistant had said, he had left Maple City and gone abroad. And she should let go of him completely. For him, there was only hatred. 3 months. Aaliyah whispered to herself, give me 3 more months, and I will forget you completely. Chapter 12. She turned and walked to her desk, turned on her computer, and began working. In the days that followed, Aaliyah acted as if nothing had happened. She ate, shopped, and watched movies with Jason every day, even posting photos of the 2 of them on social media with the caption, with you by my side for the rest of my life, that's enough. Jason smiled sweetly, wrapped his arm around her shoulder, and looked at her with eyes full of happiness. Aaliyah, you've been so kind to me lately. Aaliyah glanced down at him, her lips curving into a faint smile. You're my future husband. If I'm not kind to you, who else would I be kind to? Jason smiled even more brightly, leaning against her shoulder, as if he were the happiest man in the world. Mr. Bailey saw the change in Aaliyah and sighed in relief. Me patted Aaliyah on the shoulder, his tone filled with satisfaction. Aaliyah, you finally let go. Jason is a good young man. You 2 should live happily together in the future. Aaliyah nodded, her face adorned with a faint smile. Dad, rest assured, I will. Only Aaliyah herself knew how much she was suffering inside. Every time the night grew quiet, she couldn't help but think of Lawrence. She thought of his smile, his tears, his tenderness, and his betrayal. Those memories were like a knife, repeatedly cutting into her heart, causing her unbearable pain. Until one day, she received an invitation to a class reunion. Aaliyah stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, holding the invitation to the class reunion in her hand, her brows slightly furrowed. She had no intention of going. Those memories of youth had long been locked away, and she did not wish to revisit them. However, Jason approached her enthusiastically, wrapping his arm around her shoulder, his voice tinged with nostalgia. Aaliyah, we haven't been in touch with our classmates in ages. Why don't we go together? There's nothing else to do anyway. Aaliyah looked up at him. His eyes were filled with anticipation. She remained silent for a moment before finally nodding. All right, let's go together. The reunion was held in a private room at a high-end restaurant. When Aaliyah and Jason arrived, the private room was already filled with people. Upon seeing them, the classmates stood up to greet them, their faces adorned with enthusiastic smiles. Aaliyah, Jason, you're here. You 2 are such a perfect match. The class monitor smiled as he approached them, his tone full of flattery. Jason smiled happily, wrapping his arm around Aaliyah's shoulder, as if he were the happiest man in the world. Aaliyah merely nodded faintly, her face showing little emotion. The atmosphere at the gathering quickly became lively, with everyone drinking, chatting, and reminiscing about the fun times of their youth. Aaliyah sat in the corner, holding a glass of red wine, but didn't take a single sip. Aaliyah, our campus bell, why aren't you talking? The class monitor suddenly came over, smiling and patting her shoulder. Is it because we haven't seen each other in so long that we've grown distant? Aaliyah smiled faintly. No, I just prefer to listen to everyone else. The class monitor laughed heartily, turned around, and pulled out a stack of envelopes from his bag. By the way, do you all remember the letters we wrote to ourselves 10 years ago? Today marks exactly 10 years, so I brought all the letters. Let's see if our dreams have come true. The private room erupted into cheers, and everyone gathered around eagerly, eager to see their own bold declarations from back then. Jason also eagerly joined in, reaching out to grab a letter belonging to Aaliyah from the class monitor's hand. Aaliyah, let me see what you wrote back then. He smiled as he opened the envelope, his eyes falling on the letter. However, his smile froze on his face. The letter was densely filled with words, and every line, every word, was about Lawrence. Aaliyah of 10 years later. If you're reading this letter, I hope you still remember Lawrence. That boy with the bright smile, the boy you swore to protect for a lifetime, the boy you loved most. Have you two gotten married yet? If so, was the wedding held in Sunset City? He once said he wanted to marry you in the sacred land, with all the gods witnessing your love. Do you have children yet? He said he wanted 2 children, a boy and a girl. The boy would be like him, and the girl like you. Your children must be so adorable. If you have forgotten him, please remember him. Because he is the person you love most in this world. L. Jason's hand trembled slightly, and his face turned extremely pale. He suddenly looked up at Aaliyah, his voice trembling. Aaliyah. Aaliyah's gaze fell on the letter, her eyes flickering with a complex emotion. She reached out to take the letter and said softly, "It's all in the past." After speaking, she tore the letter into pieces and casually threw them into the trash can. The atmosphere in the private room suddenly became awkward, and the classmates looked at each other, unsure of how to break the ice. The class monitor quickly smiled and said, "Oh, it's all in the past. Aaliyah must have let it go long ago. Someone like Lawrence, who did such a thing, doesn't deserve to be remembered." The other classmates chimed in, exactly, exactly. Aaliyah is so happy with Jason now. Let the past stay in the past. Jason's expression remained grim, but he forced a smile and said nothing more. Aaliyah, however, remained expressionless, as if none of it had anything to do with her. After the gathering, Aaliyah and Jason prepared to leave. However, just as they reached the restaurant entrance, a classmate suddenly caught up to them. Aaliyah, wait. The classmate panted, I have something I want to talk to you about. Aaliyah stopped and gave him a casual glance. What is it? The classmate hesitated. Jason, could you step aside for a moment? I want to talk to Aaliyah alone about this. Jason was surprised that there was something he couldn't hear, but since the classmate was also involved in business, he assumed it might be related to business matters and didn't think much of it. The classmate watched as Jason walked off to a distance, ensuring he couldn't hear, before whispering, Aaliyah, my family recently had some financial issues, and I wanted to ask you for help. But when I arrived at your villa, I saw the fire. I was about to rush in to help, but then I saw Lawrence rescue you from the flames. Chapter 13. Aaliyah's pupils contracted sharply, and her fingers clenched unconsciously. The classmate continued, later, Jason arrived, and Lawrence actually handed you over to him, letting him take credit for saving you. I found that strange at the time. If Lawrence was truly that malicious, why would he save you? And why wouldn't he take credit for it? Aaliyah's mind instantly flashed back to the scene from that night. She remembered waking up to find Jason by her bedside, his eyes filled with concern. He said it was he who had risked his life to rush into the fire and save her. And she had never doubted it. Are you sure? It was Lawrence who saved me. Aaliyah's voice was hoarse. The classmate nodded. I saw it with my own eyes. I'm quite sure. Aaliyah's heart sank, and the image of Lawrence's pale face involuntarily flashed through her mind. The scars on his back, his cold response, his unhesitating admission of being cruel, everything seemed to come together in that moment. Why did he do that? Aaliyah whispered, as if asking herself, yet also addressing the person who had long since vanished. The classmate shook her head. I don't know either. But I always felt that Lawrence might not be as bad as everyone said. Aaliyah didn't speak again. A storm seemed to be raging inside her. The emotions she had deliberately suppressed, the memories she had forced herself to lock away, all surged up at that moment. She remembered Lawrence's smile, his tears, his tenderness, his betrayal. But if he was truly that cruel, why did he save her? And why did he give the credit to Jason? Aaliyah, what's wrong? What did he say to you? It wasn't until the classmate had left and Jason's voice suddenly rang out that her thoughts were completely interrupted. Aaliyah snapped back to reality and said softly, nothing, let's go back. Jason nodded, put his arm around her shoulder, and his face once again lit up with a joyful smile. However, Aaliyah's heart could no longer find peace. After returning home, Aaliyah stood alone by the floor-to-ceiling window, gazing at the distant night sky. She held a glass of red wine in her hand but hadn't taken a single sip. The words of that classmate echoed endlessly in her mind, along with Lawrence's pale face. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and tried to calm the turmoil within her. However, the memories she had deliberately forgotten surged like a tidal wave, completely overwhelming her. As the night grew deeper, Aaliyah sat alone in her study, holding a letter that had already turned slightly yellow. It was a letter Lawrence had written to himself 10 years later, which she had secretly taken from the party when no one was looking. The edges of the envelope were worn, as if bearing the marks of too many years. Her fingertips trembled slightly as she slowly opened the envelope and pulled out the letter inside. The handwriting on the paper was neat and familiar, every stroke etched into her heart. She took a deep breath and let her gaze fall on the words. To Aaliyah 10 years from now. To you are reading this letter, I hope you still remember Lawrence. That boy with the bright smile, the one you swore to love for the rest of your life. Are we still together? If we are you still the same as before, quietly taking care of everything for me? Remember I once said I'd take you to Sunset City to get married, so that all the gods of the mountain could witness our love. Did we go there? Is the sky there as pure as the legends say? Did we already make a vow of eternal love under mountain? Do we have children yet? I remember we once promised to have 2 children, a boy and a girl. The boy would be like me, and the girl like you. Our children must be so adorable, right? Maybe they already started calling us mom and dad. Do you tell them stories every day and play with them? Do you love them as much as you love me? Is our home warm and cozy? I remember saying I wanted to buy a house with a garden, filled with the flowers you love. Every morning, would we drink coffee together in the garden, watching the children run on the lawn? In the evenings, would we cook together, then sit on the sofa, watching TV and chatting? Aaliyah, if you see this letter, please remember that I am the person who loves you most in the world. Even if we are no longer young 10 years from now, even if our lives have become mundane, I hope you will remember that we once loved each other so deeply and were so happy. Chapter 14. Aaliyah continued to live her life as usual, but only her assistant noticed that her eyes were becoming increasingly vacant, as if she were a walking dead. Miss Bailey, you don't seem to be doing well lately. Would you like to see a psychologist? The assistant asked cautiously. Aaliyah gave him a cold look and replied impatiently, I'm fine. I don't need to. The assistant opened his mouth to say something else, but Aaliyah had already turned and walked away, leaving only a cold, indifferent silhouette. The wedding preparations grew increasingly hectic, but Aaliyah grew increasingly silent. Until one night a week before the wedding, she was drunk, sitting alone in the corner of a bar, holding a glass of strong liquor, her eyes vacant as she stared ahead. Just then, a figure in a casual suit approached and sat down beside her. Pip carried a faint scent of perfume, and his fingers gently touched her cheek. Aaliyah, why are you drinking so much alone? His voice was gentle and familiar. Aaliyah lifted her head, her drunken eyes blurry, as if she saw the figure she had been longing for day and night. Her heart skipped a beat, and she reached out to pull him into her arms, lifting her head to kiss his lips fiercely. The kiss was wild and passionate, as if she were pouring all her longing and pain into it. Her fingers clung tightly to his waist, as if afraid he would suddenly disappear. Until she whispered that name, Lawrence. The figure in her arms stiffened suddenly, then pushed her away forcefully. Aaliyah froze for a moment before realizing who was in front of her. It was Jason. P's eyes were filled with tears, and his voice trembled slightly. Aaliyah, whose name did you just call? Aaliyah sobered up instantly, her brows furrowing tightly as she spoke impatiently. Why are you dressed like this? We agreed I wasn't ready yet. Jason's tears broke free, and he cried out in accusation, not ready yet. Aaliyah, I'm your fiancé, yet you've never let me touch you. Every time before was just a show for Lawrence. You never even let me take off your clothes. Now that we're about to get married, do you plan to never let me touch you for the rest of your life? Aaliyah's head ached. She massaged her temples, her tone cold. Let's both calm down. Chapter 15. After speaking, she turned and left the bar, getting into the car alone. She lit a cigarette, took a deep drag, and tried to calm her restless heart. However, the memories she had deliberately suppressed surged like a tidal wave, completely overwhelming her. It was their first time. She lay beneath Lawrence, her face flushed with shyness, her eyes filled with dependence and affection. Aaliyah, will you always love me? She lifted her head and kissed his forehead, her voice gentle. Of course I will. I will always love you, until we grow old together. Her body trembled slightly, her eyes filled with a mix of tension and anticipation. Lawrence's movements were gentle and slow, as if afraid of hurting her. Her fingers gently traced his skin, feeling his warmth and heartbeat. Her breathing grew fast, and her eyes gradually filled with a hazy mist. Lawrence, it feels so good. She murmured softly, her voice trembling slightly. Lawrence leaned down and kissed her lips, silencing her voice. His movements grew faster, their breaths intertwining as if they were merging into one another's very bones. Her fingers clutched his back tightly, her nails digging deeply into his skin, as if afraid he might suddenly vanish. In that moment, Aaliyah's heart was filled with satisfaction and happiness. She knew she could never let go of him for the rest of her life. Aaliyah's hands clenched the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles turning white from the force. Her body reacted involuntarily, her mind filled with images of Lawrence. His smile, his tears, his tenderness, his betrayal, everything seemed to come together in that moment. She closed her eyes, her fingers slowly sliding down, beginning to masturbate. All the emotions she had deliberately suppressed were released in that moment. Her breathing became rapid, and beads of sweat formed on her forehead. Finally, she released herself, collapsing onto the seat, as if all her strength had been drained. In that moment of release, she knew she was done for. She could no longer deceive herself. No matter how much she hated Lawrence, no matter how hard she tried to forget him, her heart could not let go of him. He was her murderer, the person she could never forgive in this lifetime, yet he was also the person she loved most in this lifetime. By dawn, she had smoked an entire pack of cigarettes. The ground was littered with cigarette butts. She made a decision and drove to the cemetery. A heavy rain poured down, the rain falling like broken beads, splashing onto the ground and creating ripples of water. The cemetery was empty, except for Aaliyah, who knelt motionless before her mother's tombstone. Rainwater streamed down her hair, cheeks, and collar, soaking her entire body, but she seemed oblivious. Her gaze was fixed on the photo of Mrs. Bailey on the tombstone, that kind and gentle face, which now felt unbearably heavy to her. Her fists were clenched tightly, her nails digging deeply into her palms, blood mixing with the rainwater and dripping onto the ground. Mom. Aaliyah's voice was hoarse and low, as if forced out from the depths of her throat. I'm sorry. Her voice was drowned out by the rain, as if it had never existed. The image of Lawrence kept echoing in her mind, those memories like a knife, repeatedly piercing her heart, causing her pain so intense she could barely breathe. She knew that dwelling on Lawrence now was shameful. He was her murderer, the person she could never forgive in this lifetime. But why did her heart still involuntarily think of him? Why, even though she hated him, could she still not let go of him? Mom, I really tried. Aaliyah's voice trembled slightly, but I can't let go of him. Chapter 16. Rainwater trickled down her cheeks, indistinguishable from tears. Her body trembled slightly, as if enduring immense pain. She knew she had wronged Mrs. Bailey and the Bailey family, but she could no longer deceive herself. For 3 days and 3 nights, Aaliyah knelt before Mrs. Bailey's grave, refusing food and water, motionless. The cemetery staff had tried to persuade her to leave, but she merely gave them a cold glance, her voice carrying an air of unwavering authority. Get out. The staff dared not persist, watching her from a distance, filled with confusion and concern. By the 3rd day, the rain had finally stopped. Aaliyah slowly stood up, her knees numb from kneeling for so long, but she seemed oblivious to the pain. She looked at her mother's tombstone one last time and whispered, Mom, I'm sorry. This lifetime, I might really let you down. After saying that, she turned and left the cemetery, her figure lonely and resolute. Upon returning to the Bailey family, Aaliyah's first action was to cancel the engagement. Lou's father and Jason were both stunned upon hearing the news. What did you say? Lou's father's voice carried a hint of disbelief. Cancel the engagement. Aaliyah, do you know what you're saying? Aaliyah's face showed no emotion, her tone cold and resolute. I said, cancel the engagement. Jason's face turned pale instantly. He trembled as he grabbed Aaliyah's arm, his voice tinged with pleading. Aaliyah, why? Did I do something wrong? I won't touch you without your permission anymore, okay? Don't cancel the engagement. Aaliyah looked at him, her tone tinged with guilt. It has nothing to do with that. Jason's tears broke free, and he asked tremblingly, Is it Lawrence? You still can't forget him, can you? Aaliyah remained silent for a moment before finally nodding. Yes. Lou's father's face turned ashen, and he slammed his fist on the table, his voice filled with anger. Aaliyah, have you forgotten that he killed your mother? How can you still think of him? Aaliyah clenched her fists tightly, her nails digging deeply into her palms. Her voice was hoarse and low. I haven't forgotten. That's why I went to my mother's grave and knelt there for 3 days and 3 nights. But I've tried, and I just can't let go of him. Lou's father was so angry he was trembling. He grabbed the whip on the table and lashed it viciously across Aaliyah's body. You ungrateful daughter. I'll beat some sense into you today. The whip struck Aaliyah's body again and again. Her clothes were soon torn to shreds, and her skin was covered in bloody welts. But she remained motionless, as if she felt no pain. Can you let go? Mr. Bailey's voice carried a hint of hysteria. Aaliyah's lips began to bleed, but her tone remained firm. I can't let go. Can you let go? Mr. Bailey struck again with the whip. Aaliyah's body trembled slightly, but her voice remained calm. I can't let go. Can you let go? Mr. Bailey struck once more with the whip. Aaliyah's body finally gave way, and she collapsed to her knees. Her back was a bloody mess, and blood flowed down her body, staining the ground red. But she still raised her head, her gaze fixed on Lou's father. I'm going to find him. This lifetime, I'll bind him to me even if I have to tie him up. In the next life, we'll go to hell together. But this lifetime, without him, I'll die. Mr. Bailey's hand trembled violently, and the whip fell to the ground. His body swayed, as if he had aged 10 years in an instant. His voice carried a hint of despair. What a sin! What a sin! After speaking, his body suddenly tilted, and he fainted on the ground. Dad! Aaliyah jumped to her feet, ignoring her own injuries, and rushed over to support Mr. Bailey. Her voice trembled with panic. Call an ambulance. Jason stood beside her, his face as pale as paper. He watched Aaliyah's back, his eyes filled with despair and pain. He knew that in this lifetime, he would never be able to enter Aaliyah's heart again. The ambulance arrived quickly and Mr. Bailey to the hospital. Chapter 17. The hospital corridor was filled with the sharp, cold smell of disinfectant. Aaliyah stood at the door of the ward, looking through the glass window at Mr. Bailey, whose face was pale on the bed. Her fists were clenched tightly, her nails digging deeply into her palms, blood seeping through the cracks, but she seemed oblivious. Mr. Bailey slowly opened his eyes, his gaze falling on Aaliyah, filled with disappointment and exhaustion. His voice was hoarse and low, as if he had used up all his strength. Aaliyah, if you insist on being with Lawrence, I will revoke your position as the head of the Bailey Group and adopt a daughter from outside. You will no longer be the heir to the Bailey family. Aaliyah clenched her fists tighter, her knuckles turning white from the effort. Her gaze was firm and calm, her tone devoid of any hesitation. Dad, I will give up everything. Aaliyah, do you know what you're saying? You are the heir to the Bailey family, the head of the Bailey Group. Are you willing to abandon your family's responsibilities for a man? Dad, I know you're disappointed in me, and I know you hate Lawrence. But I've tried, and I just can't let go of him. He's the person I love most in this world, and even though he did those things, my heart is still occupied by him. I can give up the Bailey Group, give up everything, but I can't give up him. I know we're both beyond redemption. Rest assured, in the next life, I'll go to hell with him. A flash of shock crossed Mr. Bailey's eyes, followed by deep disappointment. He closed his eyes, as if unwilling to look at Aaliyah again. Go. Don't let me see you again. Aaliyah said nothing more and turned to leave the ward. Her back was lonely and resolute, as if she had already prepared herself for everything. As she walked out of the hospital, Aaliyah bumped into Jason. His face was pale, his eyes filled with fatigue and pain. They locked eyes for a moment, then Jason suddenly smiled, a bitter smile. Aaliyah, after all these years, I still lost to Lawrence. Jason, I'm sorry, but it's over between us. Jason's tears broke free, and he trembled as he said, actually. I framed Lawrence many times before. I deliberately made him misunderstand you, deliberately made him see our intimate moments, and even made him think you hated him. I did all this just to make you give up on him completely. But I never expected that while you were hurting him on the surface, it was you who was hurting yourself. Aaliyah's pupils contracted sharply, her fists clenched tightly, her nails digging deeply into her palms. Her voice was hoarse and low. What did you say? Jason's tears streamed down his cheeks, his voice tinged with despair. Aaliyah, I've let go. Go find him. You don't need to apologize to me. The engagement is cancelled, and losing you is my punishment. I shouldn't have coveted something that wasn't mine. After you're with Lawrence, please tell him I'm sorry. I was blinded by desire and repeatedly framed him to get you. Not being able to have the one I love for the rest of my life is my punishment. Aaliyah clenched her fists tighter, her knuckles turning white from the force. Her gaze was cold and sharp, her tone tinged with suppressed anger. Jason, you. But in the end, she said nothing and turned to leave. Everyone is a villain. She is. Lawrence is. What right does she have to condemn Jason? Jason's tears flowed even more fiercely. He suddenly shouted, Aaliyah, I'll take care of your father for you. You must be happy. Aaliyah said nothing more and walked out of the hospital in large strides. As she stepped out of the hospital, Aaliyah felt an unprecedented sense of relief. She took out her phone and dialed her assistant's number. Find Lawrence's whereabouts immediately. Use any means necessary, but find him. On the other end of the line, the assistant's voice trembled slightly. Miss Bailey, why? Why are you looking for him? Aaliyah's brows furrowed slightly, her tone tinged with impatience. Stop wasting time. Find him immediately. The assistant fell silent for a moment, his voice hesitant. Miss Bailey, actually, Lawrence is already dead. Aaliyah's heart sank suddenly, as if something had crushed it, making it hard to breathe. Her voice was hoarse and low. What did you say? The assistant's voice trembled slightly. On the day of the blood draw, it was him who died. His blood was drained, and he stopped breathing on the spot. I didn't dare tell you at the time. Chapter 18. Aaliyah's hand trembled violently, and her phone almost fell to the ground. Her body swayed suddenly, and she almost fell down. The words of her assistant echoed in her mind, like a sharp knife stabbing her heart over and over again. How is that possible? How is that possible? Her throat felt sweet, and a mouthful of blood spurted out, staining the glass window in front of her red. Her body swayed, the world spun before her eyes, and she collapsed heavily onto the ground. When Aaliyah awoke, she was surrounded by blinding white light. The pungent smell of disinfectant filled the air, and the rhythmic ticking of medical equipment echoed in her ears. Her head felt heavy, her chest felt as though it were crushed by a boulder, and breathing became difficult. The assistant sat by the bed, her eyes red-rimmed, clutching a document tightly in her hand. Upon seeing her awake, she hurried forward, her voice hoarse. Miss Bailey, you're finally awake. Aaliyah's vision was blurry. She strained to focus on the assistant. What happened to me? The assistant lowered her head, her voice trembling with emotion. You vomited blood and fell into a coma. The doctors fought to save you for a day and night, issuing multiple critical condition notices. Aaliyah's brows furrowed slightly as fragmented memories flashed through her mind. The assistant's voice on the phone, the news of Lawrence's death. Her heart clenched tightly, her voice weak yet urgent. Lawrence. Is he really dead? The assistant swallowed hard and nodded. Yes, Miss Bailey. Mr. Reed had cancer, in its final stages. Plus, he drained all his blood to save Mr. Cox before he died. His last wish was to be cremated, so during the time I took off work, I took him to Sunset City for the cremation. The cremation master said he was a pure soul. A pure soul. Aaliyah's voice was hoarse and barely audible. Her fingers unconsciously clenched the bedsheet, her knuckles turning white from the pressure. Seeing her like this, the assistant's eyes grew redder. He pulled a document from his pocket and tremblingly handed it to Aaliyah. Miss Bailey, I couldn't live in peace by something was hidden, so I investigated the matter from back then. This document is the truth. Aaliyah's fingers trembled slightly as she took the document and flipped to the first page. As she read each page, her face grew paler, and the shock and pain in her eyes were almost overwhelming. The document detailed the truth behind the car accident. Her mother, suffering from a depressive episode, mistakenly identified the bodyguard as her father and had sex with him. Lawrence took full responsibility to protect the Bailey family's reputation, even going so far as to allow himself to be sent to prison by her own hand. He did it for me. Aaliyah's voice was hoarse and barely audible. Her fingers clenched the document tightly, her knuckles turning white from the pressure. A sharp pain surged through her chest again, and she suddenly coughed up a mouthful of blood, staining the snow-white sheets red. Her body collapsed weakly back onto the bed, and the world around her began to blur. Miss Bailey. Miss Bailey. Doctors and nurses rushed in, and the emergency alarm sounded in the ward. Aaliyah's consciousness grew faint, but she seemed to hear Lawrence's voice echoing in her ears. She recalled his hesitant gaze, his forced smile in her presence, and the pale expression she had seen on his face countless times. Her heart felt as though it were being squeezed by an invisible hand, the pain almost suffocating her. Outside the emergency room, Mr. Bailey and Jason hurried over. Mr. Bailey's expression was somber, his tone tinged with impatience. Didn't Aaliyah go to find Lawrence? How did it come to this? That man was so bad. Jason stood beside him, his face pale, his eyes filled with unease. Just as he was about to speak, the assistant suddenly stood up, his voice cold and angry. Mr. Reed is dead. He died from blood loss while trying to save Mr. Cox. Jason was struck as if by lightning, his body trembling violently, his face turning deathly pale. What? He died to save me. Mr. Bailey sneered, his tone filled with sarcasm. He deserved to die. Such a person should have died long ago. The assistant clenched his fists in anger, his knuckles turning white. He took a deep breath and handed another document to Mr. Bailey. You've all misunderstood Mr. Reed. This is the truth from back then. Chapter 19. Mr. Bailey paused, reached out to take the document, flipped it open, and his face turned ashen. His fingers trembled slightly, and his eyes were filled with disbelief. This can't be possible. Jason leaned in to take a look, his face also turning pale, his body swaying, almost unable to stand. In the emergency room, Aaliyah's consciousness hovered between life and death. Her mind was filled with images of Lawrence, him smiling in the sunlight wearing a white shirt, the way he would cuddle in her arms, and the despair in his eyes through the prison glass. Lawrence. Aaliyah's voice was faint as tears streamed down her cheeks, soaking the pillow. She couldn't believe that Lawrence was gone, and she couldn't accept that the hatred she had harbored toward him all these years was a misunderstanding. All along, Lawrence had been silently protecting her, loving her deeply in his own way, yet she had pushed him into the abyss with her own hands. The emergency treatment lasted a day and night, and Aaliyah hovered between life and death several times before being pulled back by the doctors. When she woke up again, only the assistant was by her side. The assistant's eyes were red, and his voice was hoarse. Miss Bailey, you finally made it through. Aaliyah looked out the window. The sunlight streamed in through the curtains, but it couldn't dispel the gloom in her heart. Her voice was weak but firm as she said, "Book me a flight to Sunset City." The assistant bowed her head, her voice trembling with tears. Miss Bailey, according to Mr. Reed's final wishes, he has already been cremated. The cremation master said his soul was pure and would ascend to heaven. And your body is still very weak. Going now would be pointless. Aaliyah's eyes flashed with pain. She closed her eyes, tears silently sliding down her cheeks, but her tone remained resolute. Book the flight. One day later, Aaliyah stood in the study of the mansion, the sunlight streaming in through the window, but it couldn't warm her heart. Mr. Bailey sat behind the desk, his face pale, his fingers trembling slightly, as he pleaded with her. Aaliyah, I know you're hurting, but the dead cannot be brought back to life. Lawrence is gone, and no matter how much you struggle, he won't come back. Aaliyah gazed out the window, her tone calm yet unwavering. I'm going to Sunset City. Mr. Bailey furrowed his brows, helpless and heartbroken. Sunset City has a harsh environment. Your body hasn't recovered yet. How can you go there? If Lawrence knew you were tormenting yourself like this for him, he wouldn't be at peace either. Aaliyah didn't turn around, repeating coldly, I'm going to Sunset City. Mr. Bailey clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white, his voice choked with emotion. Aaliyah, Dad knows you're suffering, but you can't do this. You can't ruin yourself for someone who's already left. Aaliyah finally turned around, her gaze cold and sharp. I'm going to Sunset City. Mr. Bailey was stunned by her gaze, opening his mouth but unable to speak. The atmosphere in the study was oppressive, suffocating, with a heavy sadness hanging in the air. Just then, the study door opened quietly, and Jason walked in. His face was as pale as paper, his eyes filled with exhaustion and pain. He looked at Aaliyah, then at Lou's father, and spoke softly but firmly, Mr. Bailey, let her go. Mr. Bailey paused, furrowing his brows. Jason, how could you? Jason lowered his head, his voice choked with emotion. I know Lawrence's death has been a huge blow to Aaliyah. She needs time to accept and face it. Let her go, or she'll never be able to let go for the rest of her life. Mr. Bailey's expression changed repeatedly, but he eventually sighed heavily and waved his hand. Do as you please. I don't care anymore. Jason walked up to Aaliyah, looked up at her, his eyes filled with complex emotions, and said, Aaliyah, please tell him I'm sorry. I will remember him for the rest of my life and will do my best to help others, as a way of atoning for my sins. Aaliyah's gaze remained icy, as if she hadn't heard his words. She turned and left the study, her back lonely and resolute. Chapter 20. A few days later, Aaliyah set off alone on her journey to Sunset City, with her assistant tagging along out of concern. Throughout the trip, Aaliyah remained unusually calm, sitting by the airplane window, her gaze fixed on the endless clouds outside, yet her eyes were hollow. Upon arriving in Sunset City, Aaliyah headed straight to the site of Lawrence's sky burial. The sky burial site was on a barren hillside, surrounded by snow-capped mountains, with a solemn atmosphere in the air. Aaliyah stood before the sky burial site, staring at the remaining traces, and asked in a low voice, what was the situation like at the time? The assistant stood behind her, hesitating for a moment. Miss Bailey, are you sure you want to hear this? Aaliyah did not look away, speaking calmly, tell me. The assistant took a deep breath and spoke slowly. That day, the sky burial master followed the ritual, making the first incision along the spine of Mr. Reed's body, then systematically dismembering the limbs, using stones to crush the bones. The vultures arrived quickly, first devouring the internal organs, then the bones, and finally the flesh. The entire process was swift and clean. The sky burial master said that Mr. Reed's soul was pure and would surely ascend to heaven. Aaliyah's eyes flickered with a hint of a smile, her voice so soft it was barely audible, he really didn't leave me anything. The assistant's heart tightened with an ominous premonition, opening his mouth but saying nothing. Over the next couple of days, Aaliyah remained calm, behaving as if she were on vacation, visiting many places and taking in the scenery. She stood at the foot of the snow-capped mountains, gazing up at the majestic peaks, yet her eyes remained hollow. The assistant followed behind her, gradually relaxing. Perhaps Aaliyah had truly come just to look around and had truly let go. However, on the third night, Aaliyah stood on the hotel balcony, gazing at the distant snow-capped mountains, her voice soft as a whisper, Lawrence, wait for me. The assistant stood behind her, hearing those words, his heart clenching suddenly. He opened his mouth but could not utter a sound. The night wind blew, carrying a hint of chill. Aaliyah's silhouette under the moonlight seemed especially lonely, as if she might vanish into the night at any moment. The assistant grew increasingly uneasy. Aaliyah's calmness over the past few days filled him with fear, like the stillness before a storm. Mr. Bailey kept calling, his voice urgent, there's too much going on at the company. When are you coming back? Aaliyah's health hasn't recovered yet. We can't delay any longer. The assistant held the phone, standing in the hotel corridor, staring at Aaliyah's closed door, his heart filled with anxiety. He took a deep breath and gathered his courage to knock on the door. Come in, Aaliyah's voice was calm and indifferent. The assistant opened the door and saw Aaliyah sitting by the window, holding a cup of hot tea, her gaze fixed on the distant snow-capped mountains. Her silhouette in the morning light looked particularly lonely, as if she didn't belong in this world. Miss Bailey, the assistant said cautiously, there's a mountain of work piling up at the company. Do you think we should go back? Aaliyah didn't turn around, her calmness making the assistant's heart race. We'll go back tomorrow. The assistant was taken aback, not expecting Aaliyah to agree so readily. His anxiety eased slightly, and he nodded quickly. All right, I'll make the arrangements right away. As evening fell, Aaliyah walked out of the hotel alone. The assistant had intended to follow, but Aaliyah politely declined. I'd like to walk alone. The assistant stood at the hotel entrance, watching Aaliyah's figure fade into the sunset, the unease returning to his heart. He shook his head, trying to convince himself Aaliyah had agreed to return. Nothing else should go wrong. Chapter 21. Aaliyah walked slowly along the streets of the small town, the afterglow of the sunset casting a long shadow over her. On both sides of the street were low houses, and the air was filled with the aroma of butter tea and barley wine. In the distance, the sound of horse hooves echoed. Aaliyah looked up and saw a young girl riding a small horse, swaying unsteadily toward her. Suddenly, the horse startled, rearing up on its front legs. The girl screamed in fright, losing her balance, and was about to fall from the horse's back. Aaliyah instinctively rushed forward, grabbed the girl, and both of them fell heavily to the ground. The girl was pale with fear, tears welling up in her eyes. Aaliyah ignored her own pain and quickly checked if the girl was injured. "Are you okay?" The girl shook her head, her voice trembling with tears. "Thank you, Auntie. Why did you risk to save me?" Aaliyah paused, her gaze falling on the little girl's face. There was a striking resemblance between her and Lawrence as a child. Aaliyah's expression softened as she whispered, "Because you remind me of my lover when he was a child." The little girl blinked curiously. "Are you here in Sunset City to get married? I heard lots of people come here to take wedding photos." Aaliyah's lips curved into a slight smile, but she didn't deny it. "Yes." The little girl's face lit up with a bright smile. "Then I wish you happiness." Aaliyah's eyes flashed with tenderness. "We will be happy." The next morning, the assistant knocked on Aaliyah's door but found it empty. His heart sank, and he rushed out of the hotel, searching everywhere for Aaliyah's figure. Finally, he found her near the Sky Burial platform. Aaliyah stood before the Sky Burial platform, gazing at the distant snow-capped mountains, her expression calm to the point of being unsettling. The assistant approached her anxiously. "Miss Bailey, we should go back now." Aaliyah turned her head, looked at him, and said softly, "Go buy some souvenirs first. I'll be back shortly." The assistant hesitated for a moment before nodding. "All right, but don't take too long." After the assistant left, Aaliyah's gaze returned to the Sky Burial platform. She pulled out a note from her pocket, gently placed it on the ground, then swallowed a bottle of sleeping pills and slowly closed her eyes. When the assistant returned with the souvenirs, the area around the Sky Burial platform was already crowded with people. His heart sank as he rushed into the crowd, only to find Aaliyah's lifeless body. She clutched a note tightly in her hand, which read, "Like him, I want Sky Burial. In the end, we married. That's fine too." The assistant's vision went black, and he nearly lost his balance. He trembled as he picked up the note, tears blurring his vision. In the distance, vultures circled the sky, as if welcoming a new soul. The next day, the assistant knelt beside Aaliyah, his fingers trembling as he traced her cold cheek. His voice was hoarse and barely audible. "Miss Bailey. You and Mr. Reed are finally together." He looked up at the Sky Burial master, his tone resolute. "Please perform the Sky Burial for her." It was her final wish. The Sky Burial master nodded solemnly. The assistant stood by, watching as the Sky Burial master followed the ritual, cutting into Aaliyah's body along the spine, dismembering the limbs one by one, and crushing the bones with stones. The vultures soon arrived, first eating the internal organs, then the bones, and finally the flesh. The entire process was quick and clean. The assistant's tears silently trickled down his face. He gazed at the distant snow-capped mountains, as if he could see Aaliyah and Lawrence standing side by side, their faces adorned with faint smiles, as if they had finally found liberation. "Miss Bailey, Mr. Reed. You can finally be together forever." The assistant's voice was as soft as a breeze, yet filled with endless sorrow and relief. In the distance, vultures circled the sky, as if bidding farewell to the lovers.